The wind moved through frontier towns the way a hand turns pages in a book that does not belong to it. It slipped under doors, lifted dust from the street, and laid it gently over everything men built to look permanent. The painted sign of a mercantile, the threshold of a courthouse, the hard benches of a small church. In places like Cottonwood Gap, even justice seemed made of wood, useful, improvised, and easy to warp. Cottonwood Gap sat in a dry basin where a shallow creek ran only when the sky remembered to give rain. The town existed because of the road and an old promise: cattle to the south, or in the hills, a railroad in some distant future. It was the kind of place that grew quickly and aged faster. People did not come to dream. They came to endure. And it was there that a family was torn apart, not all at once, like an explosion, but in the cruelest manner, slowly under the hammer of necessary decisions, signed papers, and averted eyes. It was not a romantic outlaw, and not a gunfight in the street. It was frontier justice, that mixture of fear, haste, and convenience that sometimes called vengeance law and called law order. The man was named Samuel Harker. He worked cattle and hauled timber, took small freight jobs when winter tightened its grip, and kept a plain house at the edge of town. He was not rich. He was not influential. He was, like so many others, a man trying to hold up an entire world with his own hands. His wife, Eliza, knew how to make flour stretch and silence serve as a blanket. She carried the quiet courage of women who cannot afford to collapse. Their children were Martha, old enough to feel childhood slipping away, and Luke, still young enough to ask the kinds of questions the frontier did not like to answer. On the morning it began, the sky was too clear, one of those bright days that makes life look simpler than it is. Samuel left early to deliver a wagon of supplies to a ranch across the valley. He promised to be home before dark. Eliza stood on the porch, watching the dust rise behind the wheels, and felt something odd, not a mystical omen, but a sudden fatigue, as if her body already knew it would have to bear more than it wanted. When Samuel did not return at sundown, Eliza did not panic. In the West, delays were common. A broken wheel, a spooked animal, a washed-out crossing, a detour forced by weather. She lit the lamp, fed the children, and waited. But night brought footsteps. Not the footsteps of a tired husband. The sound was heavier, several men in the street, steady and coordinated, accompanied by low voices. Eliza opened the door and saw Sheriff Tomlin with 2 deputies. Behind them stood a few townsmen, as if summoned to witness something. The sheriff removed his hat. The gesture resembled respect, but his eyes were closed from the inside. "Mrs. Harker," he said, "I need you to come with me." Eliza held the doorframe. "What happened?" Tomlin hesitated, and that hesitation was the first blade. "Your husband has been accused." The word accused hung in the air, like dust that refused to settle. Accused of what? The sheriff glanced behind him, as if drawing courage from the presence of others. "Theft. A shipment of ore went missing on the North Road. They say Samuel was seen near the depot." Eliza felt the ground shift, but her voice stayed firm. "That is a lie." Tomlin drew a slow breath. "I need to take you to the council hall. There will be a hearing in Cottonwood Gap." A hearing meant a room, a handful of men, and a decision already leaning in one direction before the door ever closed. Martha appeared behind her mother, her face pale. "Ma?" Eliza set a hand on her daughter's shoulder, and that hand said without words, "Stand up, whatever it costs." "He is my husband," Eliza told the sheriff. "I will see him." Tomlin nodded, but the nod did not bring relief. "Bring a shawl," he said. "It's cold." And that was how, with a domestic instruction, frontier justice began to pry that family loose from its own life. A law that fit inside one room. The council hall was a plain building with long benches and a table at the front. Meetings about wells and fences took place there, and so did decisions about life and ruin. A faded portrait of a distant president hung on the wall, a reminder that a larger nation existed somewhere beyond the horizon. But in Cottonwood Gap, distance governed more than any flag. Samuel sat in a chair with his hands bound not in heavy irons, but with thick rope, a clear signal that he was not being treated as a citizen awaiting trial, but as a problem to be held down. His face was dusty with travel and fatigue. He did not look defeated. He looked bewildered, as if trying to understand how the world could become this in the space of a day. Eliza stepped in and saw him. Her chest tightened until breath nearly failed. Samuel lifted his eyes. When he saw her, something in his gaze split not into tears, but into a silent plea. Do not let this become the truth. Eliza moved toward him, but a deputy raised an arm. No closer, the man said. Eliza stared at the sheriff. I will not harm him. Tomlin did not answer. He looked away. At the table sat 3 men who called themselves the council. The oldest was Judge Proctor, a justice of the peace, chosen less for deep legal knowledge than for being known and having steady handwriting. Beside him sat Mr. Sutter, owner of the ore depot, a man with cold eyes and hands too clean for a frontier town. The third was Reed Colfax, a cattleman with influence, the sort who spoke rarely, but when he did, the town tended to listen. Proctor cleared his throat. We are gathered to address a serious accusation, he said. A shipment of ore has disappeared. Witnesses claim they saw Samuel Harker on the North Road. And there are circumstances. Eliza stepped forward. My husband was hauling supplies to the Valley Ranch, she said. People can confirm it. Sutter leaned in, his calm sharpened like a blade. And yet someone saw his wagon near the depot. Samuel raised his voice, controlled but firm. My wagon passed there because the main road was washed out, he said. I stopped to water the team. That is all. Colfax spoke for the first time, and his voice was low enough to make everyone listen. Ore does not vanish on its own. Eliza felt the sentence like a verdict. It was not an argument. It was a suggestion that guilt was inevitable. You know, Colfax continued, his gaze settling on Eliza as though he were doing her a favor. This town is fragile. We have thieves on the road, armed men coming out of nowhere. If we do not act quickly, we become prey. Eliza understood then. This hearing was not truly about Samuel. It was about the town proving to itself that it still controlled something. Acting quickly is not the same as acting rightly, Eliza said. Proctor frowned, as if the word rightly were inconvenient. We do not have a proper jail, he said. We cannot wait days for county authority. We must settle this here. Samuel pulled against the rope, indignation rising. Settle how? He demanded. Drive me out? Beat me? Hang me and call it order? No one answered directly. Their silence was more dangerous than any spoken threat. Eliza turned to Sheriff Tomlin, searching for some remnant of courage. Tomlin, she said, using his name, not his title. You know my husband. You know who he is. The sheriff swallowed. For a moment, something like moral exhaustion appeared in his eyes. I know him, Eliza, he said quietly. But I also know this town, and I know what fear does when it starts giving the orders. That was when Eliza understood that frontier justice was not only the absence of law. It was law made out of convenience, where even decent men could be pushed into indecency just to preserve the appearance of control. Proctor struck the table with his hand. The decision will be made at first light, he announced. Samuel Harker remains in custody tonight. Eliza felt cold move through her bones. I want to speak with him, she said. Sutter answered before the sheriff could. It is not advisable. Eliza turned her head toward Sutter, her voice low and steady. Advisable for whom? Sutter did not blink. For peace. Peace, Eliza thought, was the word injustice used when it wished to sound civilized. Lamplight and the bitter shape of choice. The night was long in the way only frontier nights can be. Wind pushed against the Harker house. Martha and Luke slept poorly. Luke woke whispering for his father, as if speaking too loudly might call something worse into being. Eliza sat at the table with the lamp burning and stared at her own fingers. She thought of running, of gathering the children and leaving before dawn. But leaving for where? With what money? And abandoning Samuel to whatever a frightened room decided. She walked out into the night and went to the small church. Inside, Reverend Sloane sat in a pew as if sleep had refused him as well. He saw her and did not waste words on needless questions. "They mean to do this quickly," Eliza said. Her voice shook for the first time. "They mean to settle it as if my husband is a sick animal." Sloane closed his eyes briefly, like a man ashamed of the world he served. "The frontier is always in a hurry," he said, "because if it slows down to think, it starts to collapse." Eliza looked toward the simple altar. "And God?" she asked, not as blasphemy, but as hunger. "Where is he when good men choose cowardice?" Sloane breathed in slowly. "Sometimes God is wherever someone decides not to lie," he said. "Sometimes he is wherever someone refuses to abandon." Eliza felt the sentence like a demand. "I do not know what to do." Sloane rose with effort. "Then do what you can do," he said. "Go to the sheriff. Make him write a record. Make him send a rider to the county before morning. Even if the town hates it, make the town feel shame, if only for a moment." Eliza left the church with her heart beating like a hammer. At the sheriff's house, a lamp behind a curtain showed Tomlin was awake. Eliza knocked. He opened the door, looking older than he had the day before. "Eliza." "Write it," she said without ceremony. "Make a formal record. Send for county authority. Now." Tomlin glanced into the dark street as if he feared the houses were listening. "Do you understand what you are asking?" "I am asking for justice," she said. "Or at least time for it to arrive." Tomlin ran a hand over his face. "If I do it, Sutter and Colfax will remove me," he said. "They will say I protect a thief." Eliza met his eyes. "And if you do not, you will carry it for the rest of your life," she said. "Even if you never see anything spilled on the ground." Tomlin shut his eyes. The truth struck home. He went inside and returned with paper and ink. He wrote slowly, as if every word had weight. "I'll send a man," he whispered, "but I do not know if he will return in time." Relief touched Eliza, but it was not comfort. It was only the knowledge that she was not entirely powerless. "Thank you," she said. Tomlin did not answer. He only looked more tired as he closed the door. First light, and what a town chooses to become morning, came cold. The sky turned pale, and dust looked almost like silver. People gathered at the council hall, the way people gather when they sense an ending, but wish to pretend it is merely business. Eliza arrived with Martha and Luke. She did not want them to see, but she also did not want the town to later claim the family had not fought. Samuel was brought in. His face stayed steady, but his eyes searched for his children with contained pain. Luke took a step forward, but Eliza held him. "Stay with me," she whispered. Proctor opened the hearing again. Sutter spoke of property and threat. Colfax spoke of example and order. Clean words used to justify something unclean. Then Eliza stepped forward and raised the paper Tomlin had written. "The sheriff has filed a record," she said. "A rider has gone to the county. Before you make any final decision, wait for the real law." A murmur moved through the room. Sutter's face tightened with anger. "You are trying to delay justice." "I am trying to prevent haste from becoming a crime," Eliza said clearly. Colfax looked at Tomlin with a quiet threat. Tomlin stood rigid, like a man who had decided to remain upright even knowing the cost. Proctor wavered between convenience and conscience. "Waiting brings risk," he said. "The risk is already here," Eliza replied. "The risk is deciding without certainty." Samuel spoke then, not shouting, but with a steadiness that quieted the room. "I did not steal anything," he said. And if you ruin me out of fear, you will not be safer. You will only prove any man can be destroyed when it becomes convenient." Silence spread. Then the door opened, and a rider came in, covered in dust, and breathless returned faster than seemed possible, as though he had ridden with desperation itself. "Sheriff," the man said, "I found the ore wagon overturned in a ravine north of town, and the wheel marks aren't Harker's. There are men hauling ore off by a narrow trail." Sutter went pale. Eliza felt her entire body tremble, not in triumph, but in shock. The truth existed, but it had nearly arrived too late. Proctor stared at Sutter and Colfax, confused. Then, "Samuel may be innocent," he said, as though the idea had only now become permitted. And there came the cruelest blow of all. Innocent did not mean whole, because the night of accusation had already done its work. It had taken safety from that family's chest, and it had shown the town how close it had come to destroying a man without proof. Colfax stood. "If thieves are on the trail, then that is where our attention belongs," he said. Sutter tried to regain control. "This proves nothing about Harker's involvement." Eliza looked at Sutter with a cold clarity that was not hatred, but recognition. "It proves you chose a convenient target," she said. "And that says more about you than it ever said about my husband." The hall became a room of men, without coordination. Some stared at the floor. Some looked at Samuel with shame. Some still wished to cling to the earlier decision, because admitting error is harder than committing it. Samuel's bindings were cut, but when Eliza touched his arm, she felt him shaking not from cold, but from something an acquittal could not mend. The price that never appears in the verdict. In the days that followed, the town tried to continue, but nothing returned to what it had been, because what had been normal had been broken. Samuel went home, yet sleep would not come. Luke watched the door, fearful of footsteps. Martha, once quick to smile, began studying adults, as if learning early that the world is unsafe, even when you do everything right. Eliza learned that clearing a name did not erase humiliation. The word innocent did not restore peace. And Samuel learned something worse. Part of the town preferred to believe he was guilty, because that was easier than facing their own failure. One morning Samuel found a word carved into a fence post. Thief, not an open threat. A mark. A way of saying, "We almost ruined you, and we still believe we had the right." Eliza felt anger rise. Samuel only stared at it, as if seeing proof that justice can be more cruel than crime. "We should leave," Martha said suddenly. "Ma, we should leave here." Eliza looked at her daughter and realized the town had taken her childhood as well. Samuel hesitated. He loved the land in the way a man loves what he has built with effort. But love is not enough when the ground becomes hostile. "Where would we go?" Luke asked. Eliza gathered them close. "Somewhere our name is not a rope around our neck," she said. That night Samuel went to Sheriff Tomlin. The sheriff sat on his porch, staring into the dark, as if expecting it to swallow him. "I heard you're leaving," Tomlin said. Samuel nodded. "I can't raise my children here, knowing that when someone needs a culprit, they'll remember my face." Tomlin swallowed, his voice rough. "I tried." Samuel lifted a weary hand. "You were the only one who tried enough to lose friends," he said. "I don't blame you, but I can't stay." Tomlin looked down. "You know what's worst?" He whispered. "It isn't that we nearly committed an injustice. It's knowing that on another night, with less paper, with less courage, we would." Samuel met his eyes. "Then learn from it," Samuel said. "I'll carry the scars, but you'll carry the choice." Tomlin nodded, and that nod held a sorrow with no clean remedy. Leaving, and what stays behind? The Harkers left early, before the sun climbed. Their wagon carried what little they owned: blankets, tools, a cooking pot, Eliza's Bible, an old photograph faded nearly blank. Luke looked back again and again. Martha did not look back once. Samuel guided the team with steady hands, but his face looked older. Eliza sat beside him, holding the children when the road jolted. At the store, Mrs. Larkin, who had never been cruel, only cautious, came out and placed a sack of flour on the wagon without asking. "For the road," she said. Eliza squeezed the woman's hand briefly. "Thank you." Mrs. Larkin did not smile. "I should have spoken louder," she said. "I'm sorry," Eliza answered with tired gentleness. If everyone spoke louder when it mattered, perhaps the frontier would not be so cruel. At the edge of town, Reverend Sloane lifted his hat and offered a short prayer, not asking the world to be fair, but asking the family not to harden beyond recognition. Sheriff Tomlin did not come to see them off. Perhaps from shame. Perhaps because farewells are another kind of judgment. The wagon rolled on. Dust rose and covered the wheels. Cottonwood Gap fell behind like a wrong that cannot be erased, only left behind. Eliza looked toward the horizon and felt something strange. Grief and relief braided together. She asked Samuel quietly, "Do you still believe we can live in peace?" He took his time. "I believe we can try," he said. "But I no longer believe peace comes from men who say law when they mean fear." Eliza nodded, and in that nod was a new hardness, not cruelty, but clarity. Epilogue: The human cost of frontier justice. Some tell the Old West as though it were only adventure and courage. But the real West was also poorly written paperwork, weak testimony, and hasty decisions made in small rooms. It was the distance between crime and a proper court. It was the absence of a jail, a trained judge, the time needed to investigate. It was a community trying to protect itself, and in doing so, sometimes destroying its own. Frontier justice was born of necessity, but it often rotted into haste. And haste, when it wears the name of law, can become more dangerous than open banditry, because it convinces decent people they are doing right while they do wrong. The Harker family was not broken by a famous killer or a dramatic gunfight. They were broken by the experience of watching their name turned into a public tool. They were broken by the neighbor's gaze that prefers an easy culprit to a difficult truth. They were broken by the bitter knowledge that innocence on the frontier was not always protection enough. Samuel carried the trauma of nearly being condemned by other people's fear. Eliza carried the weight of having to fight not only an accusation, but convenience itself. Martha carried the end of childhood. Luke carried the lesson that doors can open at night without warning. And Cottonwood Gap carried a quiet guilt, the knowledge that if the writer had not found the ravine in time, the story would have ended differently, and many would have slept anyway, still calling it order. The West demanded payment from everyone, from those who stole, from those who worked, from those who ruled, from those who obeyed. It demanded payment in trust, in bonds, in moral courage. Because true justice is not only the punishment of the guilty, it is the protection of the innocent, even when protection is slow, even when it requires waiting, even when it requires a town to face its own weakness. In the end, the Harkers traveled on with little more than courage and invisible scars. They did not know where they would land, but they knew one thing with certainty. Surviving the frontier was not only enduring weather and hunger. It was resisting the temptation to call injustice necessity. And that, more often than not, was the quietest battle of all.